Today we're reviewing the Canyon Stoic 4. Oh man, I'm so excited to bring this review to you. I've been trying to get a Stoic for 3 years. I'm so happy to finally have one in my hands. A lot of you have been asking about this, and for good reason. It looks good on paper and packs a serious punch for the price. Let's take it on the trail and see what this bike is all about. So I've got a whole first look video on this you're going to want to watch if you're interested in this bike. Tons of information where I measure the actual geometry, etc. But today we're talking about how this bike rides and comparing it to the other 80 plus hardtails I've ridden lately. Canyon is a direct-to-consumer brand, which means you're not going to find these in a dealer anywhere in the world. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to find them at demo events either. So actually throwing a leg over one before buying it's almost impossible. This bike is classified as an enduro hardtail. We live in such an exciting time to have so many hardtails available with great geometry. Morning. It's summer in Sedona, it's getting hot. This is one of the few bikes under $2,000 that has a decent fork. It has a Pike Select, which I like so much more than the RockShox 35 silver or gold that we're finding on bikes like the Roscoe. Even though it's not the fancy Pike, it feels so much better to me. Woo, this bike's fun. So this is a size medium. I'm 5'6", 167 centimeters. I'm 3 centimeters shorter than what they recommend. I'm not able to extend the dropper all the way up. My seat's too high when I do. But I like the reach of these longer bikes on enduro stuff, so I sized up. So I like the reach, I like the effective top tube length, feels good. I just admittedly have super short legs. I've really had to fiddle with the controls and dialing in lever angle and shifter position and dropper position and move all that around a ton to get this bike to feel comfortable. And you have to do that to some extent on all bikes, but this one took a lot. So it sounds like I'm just being nitpicky to be negative. I don't do that. I will say, like, the cable length, it's just kind of a rat's nest up here. I don't feel like Canyon's final build and fit and finish is quite as high as some other bikes. I would want to shorten every single cable on here a good 2 to 3 inches. And on a lot of bikes you have to do that, but on a lot of bikes you don't have to do that. So I think it's worth mentioning. This little matchmaker thing is not working well with the SRAM NX. It just doesn't feel amazing. You're always fighting for the same spot on the bar, and they just don't quite integrate very well. The shifter feels hard to reach under there. Fortunately, the new Stoic 4 comes with Dior, and I think that would be a preferred way unless you're a diehard SRAM fan. So one thing that's awesome about this is it comes with a 170 mil dropper. Very, very few hardtails are doing that. And that's why I'm having a little bit of a hard time using all of it. Still, I wish this was a centimeter shorter and then I could use all the dropper. But like I said, that's me. One thing Canyon does really well is they have these saddle height measurements where you measure from the center of your bottom bracket to the top of your saddle. That will tell you if your legs are long enough for the size they recommend. And going into this, I knew my legs were too short, but I still really wanted to try this. So not a huge deal. I could swap that out for a 150 and it'd be like most other trail bikes. I think it's cool that they came with a 170. Enough talking about things that don't matter. Let's go talk about how this thing rides. I love that this is an enduro bike that doesn't have 150, 160 mil travel. Hello. That's great, thank you. Thank you. Pretty composed. I feel like big travel forks, especially hardtails, big travel hardtails, ride like staplers. You're just always changing the geometry when the fork moves. I think 140 mil was the right amount for this bike. Need to slow my rebound down just a little. A little bit pogo sticky on here. Still getting it dialed in. This Pike Select feels good though. So much better than those RockShox 35s. This thing's pretty stiff. Getting a lot of vibration to my feet and ankles. Very shreddy. It definitely wants black diamonds. It feels quite slack. Got that short stem, slack head angle. I'm getting a lot of vibration to my body. Reminds me of Nuke Proof Scout or Common Sol Meta in terms of vibration, or Bea Laufey. By the way, if you want to pick my brain on all the bikes I've ridden and get my personalized recommendation for you where you live and your budget, become a patron today. I have a bike consultation service. Getting a lot of vibration through the hands too. And a lot of that vibration through the hands comes from frame stiffness too. It's not just fork and bars. It's every time the frame hits a jolt, it comes to your hands as well. The bikes needed for slow tech are very different than the bikes needed for fast enduro stuff. So the speed with which you ride, it's super important to your bike selection as well as your trails. So we're heading over towards a trail that's gonna wake this bike up. It'll be a little more in its element. Kind of like to test it in a variety of terrain, see what it does well, see what it doesn't, so you guys can be informed if it's a good fit for you. I'm not being paid for this review or any of my reviews. Simply here to help you know if this is a good decision for you. Seat angle feels great. Stack feels a little low, especially for a 140 bike. Front feels low, and you're in attack position. Not a bad thing. If you like racing, might feel a little bit hunched over for some riders. I'd love maybe 15 mil more stack. Back there I had a little rim strike because I'm still running tubes because this didn't come taped for tubeless. That's a real bummer. Yeah, the bike's not doing anything weird. It wants speed though. Some slack bikes don't mind picking apart chunky terrain at slow speeds. This bike definitely wants speed. Head angle feels slacker than it is. And remember, geometry is so much more than one number. It definitely begs you to go faster to wake up a little more. Wants to be at speeds over 15 miles an hour. If most of your riding's slower than this, I'd recommend a different bike that's not so slack and aggressive. Still likes to jump and play. Cool. Doesn't quite have that BMX-y feel of something like the Middle Child or the Binary Maniac. Takes a bit more effort to pop that up than some other bikes, mainly due to that low stack. My calves are pretty tight from the vibrations at this frame. So here, winching up fire roads does just fine. When I used to live in Northern California, this is how most of our climbs were. You just pedal up a fire road, then bomb downhill. Does just fine for that. I think that's going to suit a lot of people that do that. Man, I think of how far hardtails have come, even in just 5 years. This bike, 5 years ago, would have been my all-time favorite hardtail. Now I've had the chance to ride 80 to 90 other new hardtails. It still holds its own. It doesn't quite have that special sauce that the really special bikes on here have. But for the price, you get a ton of bang for your buck. All right, let's go take this into a little bit faster, a little bit steeper terrain. See if we can wake it up for what it was intended to be used for. A lot of these bikes kind of feel asleep at mellow riding like this. This one's half awake. You can tell it wants to be pushed, but it's nowhere near as zippy and exciting as like the Newhouse Metalworks on mellower stuff. All right, let's wake it up. It's a big move. Big steep drop right here. Great control, bit of a hard slam on the rear. Yeah, I felt very in control on that. Nice modern geometry for difficult riding. I'm definitely nervous riding with tubes in Sedona's rocky terrain. This bike really wants to be leaned to corner. It needs modern riding technique. Good morning.
Morning.
Yeah, this bike feels closer to a 63, 64 degree head angle. Feels pretty slack. Requires a modern riding technique for sure. And if you haven't seen my video on modern riding technique, go check that out. But basically, if you're coming off bikes from the 90s and steering at the bars like this and keeping the bike vertical, you are gonna fight this bike. This bike needs speed and it needs to be leaned. You keep the bars mostly straight and just lean the bike to turn. So I recommend some coaching and clinics to learn how to unlock bikes in that way. This is more bike than most people need, but I do have a ton of patrons who are going to love this thing. For blue flow trails, it'll do it, but I'd rather have something a little bit lighter. You notice the weight on this bike. I'd rather have something not so slack. This bike tends to amplify my weaknesses a little bit. Not very forgiving with poor technique. I am fighting it just a little on this stuff, just the slow speed balance. I'm kind of fighting it. Wheelbase feels a little long compared to like my Maniac, where that thing will shred every bit as hard as this. But the Geo's just a little bit more refined to the point where whether I'm going half a mile an hour or 25 miles an hour, it just feels balanced and dialed. This bike definitely wants speed. Let's go to the top of Ant Hill, get some speed on some exposed sections. That dropper has a loud clink when it's up and down. Ooh, you really, really have to be over the front end consciously on this. Otherwise, the front wants to plow. So you really got to shift your weight forward. Not a lightweight bike by any means. And the cassette and hub and wheel and tire feel pretty heavy in the back. You feel it when you're trying to lunge. Seat angle feels nice and steep. You just have to overemphasize your moves on a slack bike and do a little more work to keep it balanced at slow speed. So this would not be my top pick for this climb. It's a little bit more of an ox or bull than a mountain goat. You just have to muscle it up, and it takes quite a bit of energy to do so. But it'll get up there. But you're going to be more tired than something with a little bit more trail-oriented geometry. I'm really glad I went with the medium. That said, I don't think most people are going to want to size up on these. But I think their sizing recommendations are about right. All right, this part makes me a little bit nervous on this bike for some reason. It's got kind of a slow entrance to a big exposed step down. I'm just going to roll it, but I'm a little bit nervous right now. This bike feels like an aluminum under $2,500 frame, which is what it is. You're not going to mistake this for a custom boutique steel frame or even something like a Hanzo ESD. All right, I got to stop talking and think. Pay attention here. Hang on, something just happened. What just happened? What the? Something is off in the hub. That'll make you nervous before dropping into a little bit of a scary feature. Yeah, I'm gonna chicken out. That is weird. Well, when you get a bike under $1,900, you're running cheaper components, that's for sure. Ooh. Man, that rear end is harsh. What a stiff bike. Whew. I rode down this on a Sharon custom steel frame about a month ago, and man, what a difference. Felt like I was going about twice as fast. It's a stiff ride. I got a lot of vibration in my hands. Yeah, this is very stiff. I got an enduro race coming up. I don't race, but I want to support the cause at the Res Duro. This is not the bike I would choose. I'm fatigued after 2 minutes of downhill. You can feel the vibrations radiating out through the frame. It's pretty wild. All right, what do we got here? I feel like this wasn't quite assembled as well as some other bikes. If you get one of these, I would definitely check everything. I didn't check the cassette because I've never ever had to on a review bike. What kind of hubs are these? No-name hubs. So I feel fit and finish is decent, but could be a little bit better on this bike. Just working on it, it just fights me a little bit more than some of the other bikes I've worked on. I don't know. Let's see what happens when we go down the trail. You know, you compare this to like a Trek Roscoe 8 that were recently on sale for like $1,800 to $2,000. And the fork you get on this is much better. I think the Roscoe is a better all-rounder trail bike. This is more of a shredder for flow. I think I'd pick the Roscoe. These are the types of things that I talk about in my consultation service when you're trying to pick between 2 or 3 or 4 bikes, or you need ideas because you're just overwhelmed by how many bikes there are. I'll be able to tell you the difference and how they compare even though they're in the same price range. So spec-wise, I think this wins over the Roscoe with the nice pike, but the Roscoe 8 has the much nicer hub, which is proving to be a problem on this one. If you want to pick my brain, become a patron. It supports my channel, helps me put food on the table for my family. All right, let's go ride this thing. Oh, getting that ticking noise again. I think I'm just going to have to deal with it, whatever the heck it is. Yeah, I'd warranty that rear wheel. And since it's a direct-to-consumer and you can't buy from a shop, you can't just take it into your local dealer and they'll take care of it for you. You're going to have to call Canyon and take care of that. I have not experienced Canyon's customer service. I'm lacking a little bit of confidence. I thought I'd be a little more confident through here. Man. Maybe it just acts as a bell to let other trail users know you're coming. Man, this trail is still torn up from the Sedona Mountain Bike Festival. If you rode this on the mud, we're still dealing with your ruts. Too bad more people didn't stay off the trails when they were supposed to. Thanks, you guys. It's just me. Have a great day. Reminds me a lot of the Rocky Mountain Growler, but with shorter stays. I don't know. I was expecting it to wake up and be a little more composed on the downhill back there. But I just kind of felt like I was deflecting off everything instead of tracking. And I think the harshness of the frame has a lot to do with that. Still, I don't want people to think this is a bad bike. What would I pick for this price range? Man, that's a Patreon question. There's a couple others I would pick over this, but I would still pick this over 90% of the other $1,900 bikes. Yeah, I'm definitely deflecting off everything more than kind of tracking. And we talk about frame flex a lot on this channel. That's one thing you can't discern from comparing geo-charts or spec sheets or which bike has the best drivetrain for under $1,500. The ride feel of a hardtail is its soul. And man, this bike's better than my first 10 mountain bikes. So please don't get me wrong. But if you can spend another $1,000 on a bike, I think it'd be worth getting something that's a little bit less harsh. Man, I'm trying to think where the perfect place for this would be. Like, it needs to be smooth enough that the frame harshness isn't gonna wear you out. But even like Santa Cruz Flow in the demo forest, I think this is a little bit more aggressive than I'd want there. Whoa. So if I had one of these, I'd run GX Axis Eagle for $500. I'd probably put a 200 mil rotor up front. I'd definitely convert this to tubeless. I'd probably get a nuke-proof Horizon V2 wheel set on here. Not have to deal with that noisy hub. I'd probably consider like throwing in a +1 angle set, but then you're like $3,000 into the bike, and I think I'd be happier on a Hanzo ESD at that point. I know some of you are a little bit disappointed in this review, and truth be told, I'm a little bit disappointed too. I had very high hopes for this. It's not a bad bike in the slightest. If you have one and you love it, awesome. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. But I wouldn't be doing my job if every review was just a glowing review where I just talk about how great a bike is. For $1,900, there are very, very few bikes whose performance can compare with this. But I know a lot of you are curious to think, well, I love my bike, but I wonder how it stacks up to the other modern hardtails out there, and if I'm missing anything with those other ones. So this Stoic is doing some really great things. 170 mil dropper, bravo. Personally, I would have loved a centimeter shorter seat tube. I love that it's a totally straight seat tube. I love that the dropper routing is totally internal and you don't have it come out. So many bikes have a little exit port here and then an internal port here. They did the same thing I did on my Maniac, where the seat tube is shifted forward so you can get the dropper all the way through there. Every single hardtail should do that. You can get a totally straight seat tube, run a longer dropper, keep the cable totally silent in there, and then be able to adjust your seat height without having to fish through this little loop here. I don't know why everyone isn't doing that. Maybe they're lazy. Bravo Canyon for doing that. I love the massive tire clearance. I love the external brake routing. Bravo on that. I feel the stack is too low. I feel like they should have kept the steer tube a little longer so we could run more spacers on there and raise the stack up a bit. I feel like the head angle's slacker than what most people are gonna need on their bike. Slack head angles really come into play when it's a steep terrain, and then the fork is more in line with receiving the bumps. If you're slack on flat terrain, the fork binds and it doesn't want to absorb the bumps on flat stuff, which is why I'm always saying if you have a really slack bike, you need steep terrain and fast terrain. I don't think this is going to suit green trails very well at all. Can you do it? Absolutely. Can you still have fun? Absolutely. As I've said, I love the Pike Select, excellent fork. I love the tires, even though they're not the perfect selection for Sedona. I do not love that hub. I'm probably guessing I got a fluke. Wish it came with taped rims. Really can't complain one bit for components for the price, except for that rear hub. So for the price, what an incredible value. You get modern geometry, especially if you're a shredder and you like to fly and kind of plow down stuff more than flow. I do think a lot of people would actually love this bike on greens and blues with a +1.5 degree angle set. It'll bring the wheel in a little bit, stand it up just a little bit, and it'll come a little bit more alive on the greens and blues. Now, I was a little bit surprised this bike never really woke up in the black diamonds. I felt like I was more hanging on for dear life than piloting the bike. It just deflected off so many things. And a lot of that is due to the stiffness of the frame. A stiff frame, you don't just feel it in the rear end, you feel it in the bars, you feel it in how it just deflects off things. It just kind of felt like an anvil. I've had many bikes on that trail that just track the ground so much better that I'm not hanging on and kind of fighting. It was more playful than I thought it was going to be, but it's nowhere near something like a Hanzo ESD or the Binary Maniac that just, I feel like it's a really solid bike for the price. I don't feel like it's a bike worth putting $1,000 or $2,000 of parts into, because that frame's always going to be stiff. I think this falls into like the Orbea Laufey, Rocky Mountain Growler, Commensal Meta range, where it just kind of is lacking some of that special sauce, and it just doesn't stack up to some of the nicer bikes. If you're hoping to buy this and then spend $1,500 upgrading it, I'd buy a different bike. If your absolute budget is $1,900 and you can't spend a penny more, I think this is a fantastic choice. There are a couple other bikes I would recommend over this that don't have such a harsh ride feel. I think the Trek Roscoe 8 is going to be better for people on mellower stuff. I think this is going to be better for shredders. I think a Santa Cruz Chameleon, even the lower end spec, is an easier bike to ride than this. Even though it's stiff, it's not this stiff, and it was more enjoyable and more fun on most trails. I'm trying to think where this thing would really, really shine. I think Bellingham or North Shore, somewhere with a lot of loam that you're not going to just get beat to death on, but you're going to want those aggressive angles to like dive into compressions and hit big jumps and stuff. I think it'd make a lot of sense in the Pacific Northwest, Canada. High speed, steep, flowy stuff that's pretty smooth. I think that'd be great. If I hadn't ridden the other wonderful bikes that I've ridden on the channel, I would think this bike is awesome. But comparatively speaking to the most incredible hardtails out there, there's a big gap between this and like a Newhouse Solstice or an Axial Custom or a Sharon or the Binary Maniac or so many of those hardtails that are just magical. I think where this bike's intended to be ridden, most people would rather have a full suspension, especially for how stiff this is. I think this bike would suit a little bit more people if it came back from enduro and a little bit more towards trail. There are some great enduro hardtails. I just felt like I was fighting this one a lot. Who else would this be good for? This would be good for SoCal friends that just have winching their way up hills and winching their way up fire roads to just bomb on the down. I think it'd be great in SoCal. It's a good looking frame and it's got great spec on paper, and I think a lot of people who compare bikes online without having ridden very many of them and are buying sight unseen are going to be thrilled with their purchase, because you get a great fork and a solid drivetrain and a dropper and modern geo for a great price. I just feel like the ride feel couldn't quite wow me. It never really clicked with me anywhere where I was just like, yes, this is the bike I want to be on out of all the sub $2,200 bikes out there. This is still a very good bike, and if you own one, don't be dismayed. Just know that when you do spend another $1,000 on your bike, there are noticeable performance differences that even the everyday rider is going to feel. The question is this your passion? Is this what you think about when your head hits the pillow at night, and then the first thing you think about when you wake up is mountain biking, and you're willing to spend a little bit more to have that extra little special sauce? If so, keep saving. If not, and you're getting into it and you want to try it and you're not sure if you're going to love it, or you want to just hang with your buddies and you've got a entry budget under $2,000, this is still a great buy at $1,900. So on paper, fantastic bang for the buck, hard to beat for the price. Ride feel, there are a handful of other bikes that I feel ride better, even at this price range, but they're not going to have quite as nice of a fork and components. But for me, the heart and soul of a bike is the frame and how it rides. And I could put $5,000 of bling components on this, and it's still going to kind of have that harsh, chattery, deflective ride feel to it. Felt like I was a little bit hanging on, and the bike was taking me for a ride than me piloting it. Anyway, that's the value of these reviews, is you can know what they ride like instead of just comparing specs online and saying, well, you know, for $1,900, this comes with a better fork than bike X, so therefore I'm going to buy this. There's so much more to a bike than just the specs and even the geometry. It's been a pleasure to review this and share my thoughts with you. I still think if you have a $1,900 budget and if your riding style suits what I've described today, I'm still going to recommend this for a lot of my patrons. But if you're riding more blues and greens, or you have a little bit more budget, I'm going to make some other recommendations that are going to be a little bit more suited to help you have an enjoyable ride experience. Thanks for watching. If you want bike consultation advice one-on-one, become a patron today. There's a party in the mountains and you're invited.